Welcome again to the Practical Enneagram. I heard Russ Hudson say recently that one of his teachers used to say that there is no personality when we're relaxed because personality itself is based in tension. And so being able to relax is a really important capacity for us all to build as we're looking to develop freedom from our psychological patterns and fixations. Obviously, there are various ways to do that. We can learn to relax through the mind. But we can also manipulate the body and its processes in such a way that enables us to relax on demand. Kundalini or Kundalini yoga is a method for doing that, although it is more than that. The kriyas in Kundalini yoga have been developed through a lot of patient self-experimentation that we can all benefit from, and with the aim of supporting people in awakening and developing consciousness. This is something my interviewee, Lynn Roulo, knows all about, so she teaches this form of yoga and pairs it with the Enneagram to, I think, uniquely helpful effect. Things that I enjoyed about this interview: Lynn herself, the inspiration to explore some of the kriyas and meditations for my type and potentially offer them as foundation practices for clients. I also enjoyed hearing about the impetus for Lynn writing her 2 books. Should we write the book that people want, or should we write what we want? As a more self-referencing decision maker, I go with option 2. For me, it's always good to hear a different way of doing things. Nice to hear also about how Lynn pivoted from a late setback in the process of writing her 2nd book, which brings together Kundalini, the Enneagram, and intimate relationships. I think that each type has a form of resilience. I don't think 7s have the market on that, but for 7, it's the resilience, it seems to me, that comes from that capacity to reimagine after reality has delivered a cold, harsh blow. How precious that capacity is. Links to Lynn's YouTube, her books and her website in the episode notes. I hope that you seek her out, and I hope that you enjoy this conversation. Lynn, share with listeners about who you are, how you use the Enneagram, and also a little bit about who've been your key teaching influences, past and present.
Yeah, so I am an American woman living in Athens, Greece. I started studying the Enneagram back in the 90s. I was studying it, but it was very much something I was doing on the side. I am a finance professional, so a certified public accountant in the United States, and that was my career. Through a different set of life circumstances, in 2007, I came to Kundalini yoga. I began practicing Kundalini yoga, and in 2009 became a Kundalini yoga teacher. Again, on the side, still doing my finance career. And then in 2012, I relocated from San Francisco to Athens, Greece. And I say it was the best decision I made for no reason at all. I had no connection to Greece whatsoever. There was no job, there was no man, there was no Greek heritage to explore. It was none of that. It was like a calling, but it felt very clear to me that I should be in Athens. So I moved. For the first 3 years, I continued to do the CPA work. And then in 2015, again, just kind of a clarity came to me that it was time to stop doing the finance work. So I stopped, and during that time, I had free time. And so I decided to write a book because I had been doing a lot of typing interviews, and people would say, great, I know my type. This is fantastic. Now what? And I wanted them to have the now what answer. So I wrote a book that's a combination of the 2 systems, the Enneagram and Kundalini yoga, for that purpose. I was promoting it, doing lots of typing interviews. A couple of years passed, and then I wrote a 2nd book, the same topic, combining the 2 systems, but this time looking at it through the lens of intimate relationships.
I've got it right here, Lynn. Here we go.
So the 2nd book was that. Most recently, I'm focusing more on corporate training. And that I really love because it kind of brings the whole first part of my career together with the 2nd part of my career. So it's kind of like I'm back with my people, but this time I'm teaching the thing I'm passionate about. So it's been a really nice marriage of those 2 parts of my life, actually. So.
I hadn't picked up on that from the website that you're working with organizations and corporates, teaching them about the Enneagram and Kundalini?
Yeah, and what happens, they came to me actually, and it was me saying, hey, and I think the Enneagram is really having a moment, particularly now with COVID, as we're all really struggling with burnout and mental health issues and connection and looking at the importance of emotional intelligence in the workplace. I think it's become imperative almost to look at that. And I think big businesses are noticing, so.
And what is your type, for Lynn, for people who don't know?
Yeah, I am an Enneagram 7, the enthusiast, with a very strong type 8 wing. I could sit on a type 8 panel and I could convince you I'm an 8. I can act that way, but I don't care about any power. I'm not interested in that at all. I want to have fun. And then my subtype is intimate. I very heavily lead with, followed closely by social, and probably a blind spot in self-preservation.
So Kundalini yoga. So what is Kundalini yoga and why pair it with the Enneagram?
So Kundalini yoga is called the yoga of awareness. And I describe it as the yoga for people who think or who worry that maybe they can't do yoga. So everybody who can breathe can do Kundalini yoga, because the starting position is always the breath. So if you're looking to yoga to have it be more of an athletic practice, I might not lead you to Kundalini yoga. There are other forms of yoga that might be more appropriate for that. Kundalini yoga says yoga in its original incarnation was a technology for enlightenment. So it was here to help you train your mind so you could reach those higher states of consciousness. When yoga came to the West, a lot of this kind of meditation, mind training, that was chopped off, and we began to focus on the physical practice. There is nothing wrong with that. There is a lot of benefit in the physical practice. But Kundalini yoga kind of goes back more to the original intention, which is let's try to raise your consciousness. How can we get to those higher levels? So it has a large emphasis on the breath. It's a lot of breath work, a lot of breathing, and it has a lot of work with spinal flexibility, which is helping you to strengthen your nervous system. So the nervous system is a combination of your brain, your spine, and your nerve endings. It's not a place you can point to on your body, it's a whole system. And when your nervous system is strong, then suddenly you can start to kind of manage your energy, regulate your emotional state, choose your behavior. So this, having a strong nervous system is very much kind of in line with a lot of the Enneagram growth path, discussions. The breath that Kundalini yoga is focusing on, I talk about the breath as like the steering wheel for your thoughts. So if you've ever had a thought where you're just ruminating on it, you're over and over and over, and you would really like to stop thinking about something, if you can learn to really train your breath, you can start to redirect your thinking so you can choose what you think about. So the two systems actually work together very synergistically. I stumbled across it. I would never have known. And when I started Kundalini yoga, I didn't even like yoga. I was a surfer. I was a triathlete. I had done paragliding. Like, I liked those physical high adrenaline things. That was my deal. But I was breaking up with my boyfriend in 2007. And a friend of his saw that I was really struggling. And she said, hey, maybe you should try Kundalini yoga, because it helped me get through my divorce. And I was in enough pain. I was suffering enough that I was quite open. So I went to the San Francisco Kundalini Yoga Center in the Haight-Ashbury one Saturday morning, and I went for my first class. And my teacher was a man in his probably late 50s, early 60s, dressed all in white with a long white beard and a white turban. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, like, what is this? But he was wonderful. He had a really welcoming mannerism. The class was extremely soothing. I felt much better afterwards. So I started going on a regular basis. And that was kind of how the whole thing started. After about 6 months of a regular practice, I suddenly started to notice that a lot of those type 7 changes I had been trying to make literally for years started just happening. I could stay home quietly without feeling so anxious that maybe I was missing out on something. I could focus. I was having a more kind of relaxed, expansive experience. And so what I was realizing was it was this combination. It was adding the breath work and the exercises of Kundalini yoga that were helping me relax my habit of attention. And so that was kind of how the combination started. And then I began teaching them together.
Do you think there is something in here, Lynn, about you being a 7 and the impact that the Kundalini yoga had on you? Or do you think this would be impactful for every type?
I can say for certain it's impactful for every type, because what happened next, years passed. At first, it was just me, but eventually I started offering private yoga lessons. And because I was an Enneagram enthusiast, more often than not, I would have done the typing interview for the person. So I also knew their Enneagram type. And I started observing what was working for different types. So a type 9 does really well with breath of fire. A type 8 does really well with 1 minute breath, where they're slowing down the response. So one type needs to speed up, the other type needs to slow down. Type 4s are very emotional, but feeling a little bit unstable. So how do we kind of bring them back into center? Type 2s, their attention is out on the outside world. How do we focus that back in on themselves? What turned out to be beautiful is Kundalini yoga has literally hundreds of meditations and kriyas. It's almost like a recipe box.
Yeah.
So you can go and look, okay, what do I want? I want to work on depression. I want to work on anxiety. I want to work on holding, memories from the past. Kundalini yoga's got stuff for all of that. So I started putting them together and then observing my students, what was working, and sometimes having a very open dialogue. How was that for you? And so that was kind of the genesis of the combination.
And you have identified specific meditations and kriyas, which I'll ask you to explain in a minute, for each triad. There's some for each type. Can you say a little bit about the theory or thinking behind that? So
what happened was, in the first book, I was kind of doing a primer. And again, the whole idea was that I'm doing all these typing interviews and people need a next step. And so, here is the next step. It's to do a yoga kriya, which I'll talk about in a minute, and a meditation. And ideally, you do it 40 days in a row. And then if that goes well, you go to 90 days. And, there's one I was doing 5 years straight. You can go on and on with these things. But it was mapping what is the growth path for each of the types and what is the breath work or the physical exercise set that goes well with that. So it was me figuring out, okay, how do you put those together? So that was kind of the first book. In the second book is gigantic. Yeah. And that was because I had interviews of over 100 different people talking about their relationships. I didn't want to then add 9 more complete. I just felt like that was too much for the yoga side. And what I also believe is that the centers each give you a very clear kind of sensitive issue that each of the centers is working with. So the heart center is working with shame. Yeah. The head center is working on anxiety. The body center is working on anger. So I felt like there's plenty right there. Why don't I find the best kriyas for shame, to dissolve shame, to lessen anxiety, to burn out anger? And again, Kundalini yoga hands that to me on a silver platter because there's plenty there. So I would take these kriyas, I would try them out on my students. And if it worked, which it did, then I put them in the book. And
when you say it worked, their feedback would be that it's helping them to go in the growth direction?
It's a tough question to answer because there have been literally hundreds of people. It's almost like a doctor seeing patients. So some people would come to me and they'd say, I want a 40-day kriya, and I'd work with them. And at the end of 40 days, we could see how it went. Some people would say, I'm doing a weekly lesson with them. And so, okay, we're trying it and they like this meditation. So we always do the meditation, but we change the kriya. But it was basically observing that, wow, like they're getting better, like it's helping them relax their habit of attention or move through blocks or release things that are holding them back. And then what I would say is it was never that there's a meditation that doesn't work or a kriya that doesn't work. It's just that some are more appropriate. So it's kind of like, it's almost like vitamins. Like, well, it's not going to hurt you to take vitamin C, but if you have enough vitamin C, maybe there's a better vitamin to take instead.
This 40 or 90 day benchmark, is it the case that in order to know whether a kriya or a meditation works, we need to do it every day for 40 days?
I encourage people not to think super linearly because it's energy work, and energy work doesn't follow a straight line. So what we're trying to change are thought patterns. And what we're trying to manage is energy. And so these are complicated things. And why I say that is you might do a kriya for 2 months, 60 days, and you feel like nothing is changing. And then suddenly in days 60 to 75, everything shifts.
Mm-hmm.
And what was happening is behind the scenes, a lot was actually going on, but that didn't manifest you that in an observable way until later. What you're committing to is the commitment. This is a discipline. And what you're believing is that you're changing your thought patterns. The good news is we don't want our thought patterns to quickly change because that would make us very unstable, right? So it's almost that you find something that you can feel is working, and most people will feel some amount of relief after their first session. So they're feeling a little bit better. And then you kind of just take a leap of faith that, okay, I'm going to keep doing this. It's almost like going to therapy. Like you go to therapy and okay, maybe the first couple sessions you work well with the therapist, you've got faith, but then after that, you kind of have to decide you're going to keep going for some period of time, because there might be blocks and there might be, periods where it feels like, wow, nothing's happening, and you've got to trust the process a little bit. So I have had people who didn't commit, who would hear me enthusiastically talk about it, and they would try a meditation once and be like, great. And then they'd have an episode where they got really angry and they tried the meditation again and they were frustrated that it didn't work. And I was like, well, it's not like you just, you have to do the work. You've got to actually kind of change your thought pattern, and you can't wait till you're in crisis and do one meditation for 3 minutes and think that that's going to solve everything. It's not like that.
We're all very impatient for change when we're seeking change. But
I think people usually come when they're suffering, and people are impatient to stop suffering. And I understand that. So I think that's the thing. I think if you can start the process when you're not in acute pain, it's a lot better, because then you can make gentler changes that just are happening, and you're not in this moment of crisis than trying to suddenly pile in all of this, thought pattern realignment.
There's science behind the angles of in a kriya, is that right? Or in Kundalini yoga? Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, so a kriya in Kundalini yoga is used to describe a series of exercises that are put together in a very specific way for a specific effect. And these are very ancient practices where, thousands of years ago, a yogi would, start with the left hand, the index finger touching the thumb, and they would do that for 40 days and see what would happen. And then they would change to another finger and they would see what would happen. And they would try angles. There was a lot of experimentation going on for them to come up with these very specific kriyas. So the way we are taught in Kundalini yoga is you do not adjust the kriya. You follow it exactly as it was handed down. And there are very specific times, there are very specific mudras, hand postures, there are very specific angles, and this is all about managing your energy.
Wow. So you've got to be sort of quite disciplined in terms of, it's quite an exact science.
It is an exact science. It is an exact science that is also, I will say, based on intention. And so one of the things that, when I was going through training, they said, well, what if you accidentally have been doing a mantra wrong? And this was the kriya.
Yeah.
What happens then? And the answer was, of course, it's better if you do it correctly, because these mantras, your tongue is striking the roof of your mouth, and that's lighting up different parts of your brain. So it does matter that you did it right. However, it's not that it was a throwaway if you did it wrong, because your intention was to do it right. And in energy work, intention is a lot of the game, right? A lot of the practice. So if your intention is really pure and you were really trying to do it right, and you just made an honest mistake, it's not that, that whole thing was a throwaway. No, it's someplace in between. So,
okay, that's good to know. So Lynn, I am currently reading the second book. So this is you bringing your insights and your training from Kundalini and the Enneagram and bringing it into the realm of relationships, where actually nervous system regulation methods are very needed. I'm just thinking about my own relationships. This book is full of narratives from interviews with people, and reading the ones for a 4 is so touching. I feel more appreciated by these partners of 4s than I have by my own partners. Like, And the keys as well that you identify for 4. So don't take it personally when I need time away from you. Share your flaws and struggles with me. Don't try to fix me or tell me how I should be. I just thought they were so beautiful and on point, and I'm looking forward to reading the other types. Tell me about how this book came about and why this became interesting for you to do this, and what you learned in doing the book.
While I authored this book, I don't feel like this is my book. I feel like this is the book of every single person who contributed, because it was over 100 people who came to me and were extremely candid about their intimate relationships. And in all honesty, I was blown away at how open people were with me, because in 70% of those testimonials, I didn't know the person. So there were people who just came to me and were open to sharing. And so I really feel like this is their book, and I'm kind of the steward of it. But how the book came to be is very practical. So, at the end of the day, I'm always an accountant. What happened was I had written a blog post about the Enneagram and relationships and which types go well together. And that was from someone in my community who had asked the question. And so I thought I would write a blog post about it. So I did. And I put it on my website. And my webmaster, who is a friend of mine from grammar school, well, we've known each other since we were 11, messaged me, and he's like, your website is getting a ton of traffic. Like, we're going to have to upgrade you to the next level of service. And I was like, really? Like, what are they reading? And he's like, it's this single post. And it was actually just tremendous. Like, I was getting so much traffic. And so I had actually planned to write a second book, but I was going to write it about something else. I was going to write it about growth paths, because that's what I thought people cared about. And I'm very much like, I think you should write what people want to read, we can go in lots of directions, but like, I'm trying to be of service. And that seemed to be what people were most interested in. And it made sense, because that, of course, was also what I was curious about as well. We all want to know, how do you make your relationships better, right? So I decided, I don't think anybody has actually done a book that shows every type combination from a testimonial perspective. So this is where my type does come in, like my type 7. I was like, what could go wrong? Like, nothing can go wrong. I'll just do it. So the very first thing that happened is I did the math wrong, and I'm an accountant, so that shouldn't have happened. But I thought, okay, there's 45 type combinations. I just need to find 45 people. Well, no, because if you're going to do each side, then it's 81. So after about 2 weeks of working on the book, I'm like, wait a minute, like, this is much bigger than I thought. But I was getting good feedback and like people. So, anyway, so I kind of continued down the path. And what ended up happening is the book educated me. So I knew the theory like everybody, but if you have 100 people writing in, and, sometimes I would do a live interview, sometimes it would be written, but they're sharing what's happening, you learn a lot. And that was exactly what happened. So
wow. How long did that take? I'm just curious.
It took about a year. It's interesting. I'm a 7, but I can get extremely focused, and I really loved working on this. So it was a joy. It was a lot of work, and it was stressful at moments for sure, but I really enjoyed the process. I just loved the topic, and I love connecting with people, especially one-on-one. So this was a chance to really get inside, 100 people's lives and have them share with me what was going on. I also found that because people told me the process was cathartic for a lot of people. I think a lot of times people want someone to bear witness to what happened to them. And some of the relationships didn't end well, and there hadn't really been a way to get closure. And I think this book, for some of those people, it offered them closure, actually. So there was a lot going on within the book, actually.
Yeah, that's so lovely. So nice. How do you think 7ness, and also now I know your subtype, sexual 7ness, has informed your path and focus, both past and present? It's a big question. It's a big question.
When I read Beatrice Chestnut's book, The Complete Enneagram, and I got to the intimate 7, I think I laughed out loud. As someone who is truly living in an alternate reality, who just sees the world as like completely different than it actually is, I don't think a normal person would have written the books that I've written, certainly not the second one, because they just would have been daunted. They would have been like, this is too much. And somehow it just never occurred to me that that would be a problem. And I mean, I could go through, there were hundreds of obstacles in this book. Like the fact that it got over the finish line is almost a miracle, but there was never a question. Like, I was just like, it'll be fine. Even when it wasn't fine, it was like, well, tomorrow it will be fine. So I think that there's that. And then I think there's just a suggestibility. Like, I had to get 100 people to agree to share their stories. And that was easy because I so believed that this was going to work and be useful to other people. And I think that there's that magical thinking. I mean, I think any intimate seven will probably tell you, like, there's that moment when actual reality intersects with your reality, and it can be an awful moment because you're like, things are not whoa, like, now what do I do? But it also kind of is that way where you do bend reality a little bit because your enthusiasm is so genuine and so real. And I feel that. And I think that really helped me a lot. And I think in the same way, moving from San Francisco, California to Athens, Greece, it seemed like an adventure. And it seemed like it would be great. And people come to me now sometimes because they want to change their life and they're afraid. And they ask how I did it. And it's hard for me to give them advice because I'm like, well, I wasn't really afraid. I was excited. And I think that is the seventh thing. I value experience. So even failure, and I've had plenty of failures, I don't feel so bad about that because that's just adding to my wealth of experience. So I think when that's your approach, life can feel like it's pretty unboundaried because even the things that go wrong, the point was never to get it 100% right. It was just to see what would happen. So I think that that's helped me a lot.
We could all do with a little bit of that.
It can sound really lovely, but I mean, things go wrong. It's not that. So when I was writing the second book, at the beginning, I was using the theory from an existing Enneagram organization that was online. And I had paraphrased it and I had given them credit. And I was trying to be very, very careful about how I presented it. But because it was online, I assumed it was public domain and it was okay. So I am done with the book. I've gotten all the testimonials. I've finished and it's a lot, the yoga side. I had to get approvals for all the kriyas, tons of approvals, all kinds of things. I'm down to the final thing. And I send the draft that I'm going to publish to the organization, the Enneagram organization, saying, here's what I've done. I want to make sure you know about it. I want to make sure if there's another way that you want this presented, please let me know. I'm trying to really do the right thing. And 2 weeks pass and I get an email from their lawyer saying what you've done is illegal. You cannot do that. You must have no reference to us. This is not, public content. You must remove it from your book. And I did what I often do when things like this happen. I immediately went to bed.
Amazing. You went to sleep.
I slept for 12 hours and I woke up and I spent an hour laying in bed reviewing my options. And I got up and I just decided to rewrite everything. And I spent another 3 months rewriting everything. And so what I decided was I didn't want to have a fight. That was never my point. I actually, at this point, had enough knowledge because of all the work I'd done that I could write it from scratch. I knew that was not a problem. And it, what turned out to be true is I actually think it was better because it was absolutely original work. But there was a moment where I was so excited. I was like just, weeks away from publishing. And then suddenly I had to remove and rewrite a huge chunk of the book. Yeah. So again, I think a normal person might have slowed down or considered, or maybe would have been more thoughtful at the beginning that was a possible outcome. It never occurred to me that there would be. So I don't want to overstate the loveliness of this. It's great until it's not, and then it's a disaster. But I do think that there's a way where it's just like, okay, well, now I have that experience. Now I know better. I won't make that mistake again. So.
Quite a heavy-handed response, isn't it? A letter from the lawyer.
Yeah, it is.
So you've had this amazing technology of the Kundalini system and then the content of the Enneagram. Has there anything else that you've used that has really sourced your development?
I have become very focused on diet. and what I'm eating. I mean, I'm just the example of where you start and where you end may have nothing to do with each other. So I used to eat so much processed food. I thought that was food, and my body felt fine. I was drinking Red Bull, I was eating power bars, and there were no problems. I was great. My friends were concerned. They're like, I'm pretty sure that's not nutritious enough, but whatever. I ignored them because I felt okay. I did Kundalini yoga teacher training, and part of that training was they asked us to go on a 40-day yogic diet / cleanse where we dropped alcohol, coffee, meat, including fish, gluten, all processed food. And I was the one in the class who resisted that concept the most. I was arguing with my teachers as they assigned it to us. The first week was horrible. And I think in retrospect, I was probably addicted to sugar without realizing it. I was eating a lot of processed food, and sugar is in a lot of processed food. So I was miserable. By day, the end of the first week, as we started to enter the second week, I started to feel better. And by the end of the second week, and from that point till the end of the 40 days, I was feeling tremendous. My mind was very clear. My mood was, uplifted. And I think the main thing I really noticed was my thoughts changed. So I stopped being angry about things that had happened in my past. My anxiety dropped way down. And I got to the end of 40 days. I was, like, wow, this is amazing. I like peanut butter and I love peanut butter cookies. So at day 50, I went and had a peanut butter cookie at my favorite bakery. And within an hour, I watched my mind start to act up again. And I remember thinking like, holy shit, like it's the sugar. So I absolutely stay off refined sugar. And then I've taken it a step further, and I'm even low fructose these days. So I'm that. I wasn't eating meat since I was 17, but I eat fish, but very little. I have gone very low gluten, and I just watch my thinking getting cleaner and cleaner. It's easier to stay present. It's easier to not be anxious. It's really my thinking. So it happens to be, it's good for my body as well. And I'm grateful for that. But what I really value is the way that my thinking is different when I eat this very clean diet.
So we were going to talk about this. So I'll ask about this now, or you identify as self-preservation blind, correct?
Yeah.
Or last, whichever way you want to put it.
Absolutely. And what it is it's just not in my line of vision. If I had limitless money, I would hire someone just to follow me around and clean up after me. I just drop something and I stop thinking about it, and then the dishes pile. I don't care about any of that. I don't notice it. It's just, I was living in San Francisco, and in my condo, there was a gas station that they tore down, and they were building new condos. And a friend of mine was asking, what's happening with the new building? And I was like, what are you talking about? I literally hadn't noticed that they had torn down a building and were building a new one. I just am very unaware of environment. I will go out in the snow with ballet slippers on. I just don't notice any of that.
So this greater attention you're paying now to your diet and food is maybe an investment in your self-pres. Is that how you see it?
The focus on diet is definitely healing for me because it helps me come back into balance. My stacking remains the same, but it probably is a little bit less intense. And the blind spot is still blind, but maybe it's now a low resolution picture, whereas before it was a black box, So it's not that it's changed it, but it's that, okay, I'm vaguely aware of, there are things that I'm totally unaware of.
Can Kundalini be a good intervention around the fears that come up when we move outside of our instinct sequence? Do you think?
Because Kundalini yoga is strengthening the nervous system, any place where a strong nervous system is going to serve you, it's going to help. And so I think coming, for the instincts to come back into, let's call it balance for the instincts, for sure, having a strong nervous system is going to be to your benefit. So for sure, this is going to help. All forms of yoga are actually building the nervous system. Kundalini yoga is even more focused on that.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about that's important to mention about the bridging that you do between these two systems, Kundalini and Enneagram?
I think the only thing I would just want to really say is it is accessible to everyone. I think a lot of times when people hear the word yoga, they think I'm not flexible. I don't have that body. I can't do yoga. And I would invite you to re-examine that belief, because maybe what we should say is Kundalini breath breath work. Yes, there are physical exercises, but you could also start just with the breath. And I have worked with people who were extremely sick, bedridden, could not physically get up, who were able to do a Kundalini yoga practice and get a lot of benefit from it. So I wouldn't want anybody to think that this doesn't apply to them. If you're breathing, you can do this.
Okay, great. And your book has all of the meditations and the kriyas for each type. It's also available for download on the website, isn't it, Lynn? Or people can see it that way.
And you can, if you want to just skip straight to the yoga kriyas and the meditations, I have a YouTube channel that's got all the information there. And that's all free content that you can go and try it out. Again, I guess what I would just say is it's really great to get these practices in place before you're in a crisis, because often what happens is people come to me in crisis, and I totally get that. That's how it happened for me. So of all people, I understand that. But if you can start to make this part of your daily life now while you're not in crisis, it's going to help kind of steer the ship away from those choppy waters.
Yeah, that's so true. It kicks in then when you need it that way, doesn't it? Thank you so much.
So continuing with the yoga theme, the next recording for this podcast is with Adi Paul Marino, who will be sharing about his work in bringing Tantra yoga together with the Enneagram. Don't forget to subscribe, rate or review the podcast if you're feeling generous.